You are Bruce Wayne. I'm the Batman.
These videos are not for children. If you're a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, the Infuso. And I've spoken previously about the underrated Batman series known as The Batman. A show which doesn't get the love or praise it so clearly deserves, solely because it's a Batman animated series that isn't Batman the Animated Series. And while I do intend on doing a deep dive on that show and crediting the creative choices that it made throughout, today we're gonna first look over the one movie in its canon, The Batman vs. Dracula. First things first, I have surprisingly not seen this movie before. This is one of those Batman movies that I avoided on principle alone, because I love vampires, and I love Batman, but I don't really love the ideas of vampires in my Batman movie, let alone the vampire, Dracula, in my The Batman movie. I don't know, for me, vampires are just a step a little bit too far for a superhero story. Case in point, Morbius. Yeah, that didn't work out so well, now did it? All in all, I'm not saying it can't be done. This is just one man's opinion, and that opinion is mine, so take it with a grain of salt. But personally, I don't like to mix my vampires with superheroes. Sorry. There's one time it's ever worked, and that's Blade, and that's it. But outside of it not being my own typical Batman outing, I will say I understand the thought process in making a man who could turn into a bat face off against a man who dresses up like one. Both are dark, shadowy figures who avoid the sunlight and intimidate those they come across in the moonlight. They're not entirely unalike, except for all of the major ways that they aren't. This also isn't the first time these two famous figures shrouded in darkness have met. In Batman and Dracula Red Rain, an Elseworld Batman's tale, the Dark Knight comes toe-to-toe with the Count. And it's only after Batman becomes a vampire that he's finally able to defeat his new foe. But at what cost? Batman's also fought Dracula in some unauthorized fan films over the years. Apparently, a lot of people like the idea of pitting these two children of the night against each other. One of which being Andy Warhol. And while I haven't seen a lot of footage from that movie, I've also watched way more than enough of it. Anyway, my point is that this idea isn't without merit. There's clearly an audience for it. I'm just absent from that attendance. So in concept going into this movie, I am a little bit skeptical. I don't know if you could really make vampires work in the Batman mythos. I think some of, if not the vast majority of great Batman stories are somewhat grounded in some realm of reality. There's just a touch of realism there. A little bit of fact for this fiction. And vampires, to me, impede on that reality. But then again, I guess so do impossibly powerful supermen who are allergic to green rocks, and actual giant Batmen, and those things have been proven to work too, so it's important to note that this movie was made and takes place between the show's 3rd and 4th season. And it's even more important to note that it is nothing like anything that came before it or after it within this continuity. The story starts with an unnamed inmate at Arkham Asylum who really doesn't belong there. And I actually want to credit the movie with this because it goes out of its way to explain and differentiate Arkham Asylum from, well, say a place like Blackgate. And I know how that sounds. Yeah, of course it does. One's a prison, one's an asylum. Two entirely different things. But I find that a lot of the time in Batman lore, Arkham is favored over logic. Too many times we see criminals locked away in a penitentiary where they don't truly belong. So this blatant ripoff of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest at least helps legitimize the asylum as being what it is. An asylum. And this criminal isn't solely in here for a crime, he's also in here because he's playing a part. The unnamed inmate shares some information on hidden stolen goods with Penguin and the Joker, all in the hopes that they'll help him break out and retrieve them. I would say this no-name doesn't have good decision-making skills, but considering that he chose to spend his time in Arkham Asylum, I think that goes without saying. Instead of helping the guy out, the two criminals bust themselves out of the loony bin and look to take his money as their own. Instead of a lifetime of riches, Penguin finds a lifetime of servitude when he accidentally unleashes the Vampire King himself, Dracula, who was apparently brought to rest in Gotham City following his initial demise in Transylvania. Though despite being a creature of the night, Dracula isn't one to remain silent in the shadows, with his presence immediately being felt over the terrorized city, spending his seemingly endless time turning Gothamites into obedient vampires in his wake. Unfortunately, due to some of the similarities already listed, it's somehow Batman who gets the blame for this, with the majority of the city turning their back on the hero and now considering him a rogue. So Batman is more alone than he ever was. Which is weird because Batgirl was at the very least already introduced to the show's narrative, but is nowhere to be seen here. But maybe she's better off as other holdovers from the show are made complete jokes here. Interestingly enough, this is the first and only appearance of Vicki Vale in this timeline, which is weird because she's pretty integral to what's going on here. She's a reporter that initially spends time with Bruce for his story, but quickly finds herself falling for the guy. She patiently pursues Bruce and unbeknownst to her, is pursued by Dracula. But the Count isn't looking for love. He's looking for a vessel to bring back his love, hoping to use Vicki to restore his dead wife. I think Vicki Vale really fits into the story that this movie's trying to tell, but more so over, she really fits in with the world that the series built. So to see her stay in Gotham end here is just really confusing. Especially with the way this movie ends off, it seems like they were going for something, but that something never came. I legitimately like her relationship with Bruce here, and I think these versions of the characters really complement each other. This movie undoubtedly offers up what is the closest thing to a believable, healthy, functional relationship that this Batman has ever had and will ever have. It's actually kind of a bummer to see her go, and an enigma as to why they wouldn't bring her back. I would actually say that their little relationship was one of the stronger elements of this movie, and I thought it was setting up a story that we'd see play out in the later seasons of the show, but no. It's weird that she's not president. I would have voted for her. It's weird that she's not present throughout the rest of the series because it makes me think, what was this all for? Batman and Dracula's back and forths, whether they be verbal or physical smackdowns, are always entertaining. The two are masters of combat and wit, so wherever the proverbial fighting ring is that they're stepping into, the metaphoric crowd that's watching will always get one hell of a fight. The fight scenes were pretty entertaining. And watching these two banter was like watching an intellectual competitive tennis match, with the two opponents hitting the metaphoric ball back into each other's courts continually. But I won't lie, there are some things that put me off of this movie. Hearing Dracula refer to himself as Alucard was really working on my patience. I'd like to think that a cunning character who has walked the earth for generations would have had a better choice of disguising his own identity than simply spelling his name backwards. I mean, it's not exactly subtle. A 9-year-old could crack this code. But then the movie also wants me to applaud Bruce for figuring it out? Yeah, congratulations on having an IQ greater than your age.
You did it. Good job. I can't believe it. I'm proud of you.
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for. That's what it's all about. Woo!
Actually, come to think of it, name aside, Bruce should be able to tell that this man is a vampire because... well, look at him. I mean, the world's greatest detective really had to do this to determine that? And also, why did he write Alucard like that? Why would he write some of the letters backwards already unless he knew what it was that he was spelling out ahead of time? And if that's the case, why even bother spelling it out? Like, who was that for? Was it for me? Was it for me? Because I didn't ask for that. It really drives a stake through my heart seeing Dracula tangled up in this continuity. But I will say, aesthetically speaking, I think it works. He does look like he fits in with the city around him. However, his design and overall characterization almost makes me feel like Dracula is this show's version of Ra's al Ghul. And if I saw some of the clips with him without context, I may even in fact believe that that's who he's supposed to be. One thing that really drives me crazy here though, is that Bruce Wayne, or at least the Bruce Wayne that I know, is a total skeptic. And here, he's a little too quick to jump to the vampire theory. I think if you were to bring vampirism to Gotham City, Batman would at least attempt to examine it under the lens of truth. He would first rule out the possible before jumping to impossible conclusions. But here in this movie, he just sees fangs one night when he's on patrol and he's like, oh shit, vampires, Alfred. The whole thing just feels a little bit too goofy, even for this family-friendly PG Saturday morning cartoon Batman. But when looking up other reviews on said subject, I came across a statement that wasn't spoken by me myself, but has definitely been felt by me myself. And I, also. Fantasy Film Review wrote, "It feels more like a case of a comic book canon having been twisted out of shape in order to make it work as a vampire story." And I can't help but mirror that exact sentiment. This movie is trying way too hard to twist an already established series in order to try to accommodate the fictional guest it welcomed into its universe. I just don't think that anything about this meeting of the minds feels natural. This is what happens when worlds apart combine. I don't think this was the best fit for either character. And the good that comes with this movie isn't good because of this crossover, it's almost good in spite of it. While I don't think this movie is an absolute travesty, I also wouldn't call it terrific. And it does its brand a disservice by offering up an experience that isn't an authentic representation of the series itself. If this was your first impression of this canon, it's not a very accurate one. It feels very much out of place in its own continuity. The Tim and Deanie-verse created several movies tied into their shows, and while I wasn't crazy about every single installment, we'll get to that soon, they did at least mostly feel in place with the world they set up. And if you were to watch any of these movies, they for the most part deliver an experience reminiscent of the series in which these versions of the characters originate from. This movie is decidedly not that. And I don't understand why they decide to make something so far outside the show's wheelhouse instead of something that would, well, quite frankly, make more sense for that series. What's even worse is that the entire show itself just kinda sets itself aside in order to play up Dracula. It buries established elements it's created in order to build up plot points that are only attributed to the movie. Series mainstays like the Penguin and the Joker, two of Batman's worst offenders on that show, are now just goons to Vlad the Impaler. Penguin becomes the Vampire King's human servant, taking Renfield's role in the original story, although it's the Joker who would wind up eating bugs like Renfield in that story, after he becomes a minion of Dracula's vampiric army. My point is, two of the biggest villains the show offered up are now made the lackeys of the real big bad. They become complete buffoons in the wake of the awesome power of the Count, which is a terrible way of depicting these two. And I think this movie might have been made better with their absence, rather than bringing them on to serve as incompetent punchlines. There is one thing that kind of irks me about this movie, and it's a similar problem that I have with the series itself, and it's that the very serious things that happen in it seem to actually hold very little weight. Story beats go completely unreacted to. There's a point in time where Bruce believes the Joker has died. Like, actually died. Like, dead. But he doesn't really give the subject much thought. He just immediately moves on. You know, Alfred gets wide-eyed upon hearing the news, but then it's like, alright, cool, now what? Big developments like this should lend room for bigger reactions. There should be more of an emphasis and importance put on the survival of one of the series' main characters. But it instead feels like too much of this is touch and go. Joker dying should stir up a lot of feelings in a lot of characters. Good or bad, this should mean more than it does. And to a similar extent, the whole plot of the movie, Dracula coming to Batman's town, is treated like any other ordinary plot point. It's not played up, it's just played, and then immediately moved past. I think this has to do more with the overall tone of both the show and the movie. It definitely lends to a very general feeling audience. You know, they're trying to keep it light and simple for the younger audience, but also not shying away from things for the more mature audience. But unfortunately, the adult moments that the brand offers up are given to the watcher with kid gloves, making them feel like they lack depth, meaning, and purpose. Another bone I gotta pick with this movie is Batman's no-killing rule. And I think by now most of us are aware of it. But I also think for far too long, writers have thrown as many asterisks on that rule as possible. Sure, Batman doesn't kill. He doesn't kill humans. But we'll have him murder whatever the fuck this is. It's fine as long as it's not a man, woman, or child. Like, honestly, that doesn't make it better. You're still breaking his one rule. It doesn't matter that it's not a human if it's still a person. Technically speaking, Superman isn't a human, so why hasn't Batman just immediately killed him? Their first encounters are never good ones. Why doesn't Batman just go, he's an alien, doesn't count, sorry. Batman doesn't kill should mean that Batman doesn't kill. If you live a life, Batman will not end it, even if you're a vampire. Dracula may not have been human, but he was still a man, right? I don't know about this one, guys. I'm counting. That's a death. That's a kill. That's a murder. Batman killed that guy. He very clearly killed Dracula, and he did it with next to no hesitation. I will say that there are a couple moments that genuinely did surprise me in this movie. The excess amount of blood was pretty shocking, though I guess not at all unwarranted. I mean, if you're making a movie about vampires, it only makes sense that their life source would get mentioned once or twice. But seeing Joker gleefully enter a blood bank and treat it like an all-you-can-eat buffet was definitely not something I imagined going into this. That's pretty dark. And I'm not just talking about the blood, which looks like it's closer to motor oil than actual human plasma. This moment is dark. and more so over, really, really gross. I also really enjoy the dream sequences in the movie, though I don't think they add a whole lot overall. The movie could have very easily been made without them, but they're an interesting aesthetic choice, and I'm kind of a sucker for this trope. They're completely unnecessary, but still kind of a low-key highlight for me. I'll be real with you. You say dream sequence that offers interesting visuals and tells us more about our main character's psyche and mental state, and I'm there every time. Every damn time. No questions asked. I don't care that it's overdone and maybe even a little bit pretentiously hacky. I'm there. I'm in. You got me. I want to compliment the movie on making the tone a bit darker from the show that it's based on, but it's still really confusing to me. Because the areas that they chose to use these elements in seem to be the more superficial ones, and for a lot of the more serious moments in this movie, they still kept drastically toned down as to not get too dark. So I don't really know. They tried is what I could say. They tried. The performances range from serviceable to good. No one feels out of place. I think Tara Strong especially really knocks it out of the park as Vicki Vale, but that's not really a surprise to anybody. There's a reason this woman has had a role in almost every single Batman animation created within the last 20-something years. Peter Stormare is also fantastic as Dracula, and gives you exactly what you'd expect from a Dracula performance. I don't want to go too into detail about anyone else, because they're all just playing their parts from the show, and I'll talk more about them when I'm finally focusing on the series. Ultimately, I'd say this movie was much better than I expected, but not nearly as good as I'd hope it'd be. I definitely recommend watching it so you get a feel for it yourself, and I don't think the Batman vs. Dracula is a bad movie, but I also don't feel that it's a great one. I think there's enough good here that I can easily imagine it being enjoyed by other Batman fans, but I'm not particularly crazy about it myself. And that is the Batman vs. Dracula. So if you like this video and would like to see me do a deep dive into the Batman series, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
Tweet.
and with all that being said, I was your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.